get tight and get connected, and they get intensity, and they showing their grit, showing intensity, everything intensity. Piss poor practice, performance pain. You headed for self-destruction. Self-destruction. You headed for self-destruction. Welcome back to another episode of Cultured Unplugged. And I'm going to tell you right now, before we even begin, the story and the details that I'm going to share with you is going to be very sensitive and very graphic. If this is a type of video that you're not interested in, to be able to listen to or hear, I will tell you right now, you can go ahead and click off. I totally respect it because this is a story that's really deep. So without further ado, I'm going to get started here shortly. But before I do, I just want to take the time to also thank everyone that has left out a lot of love, a lot of comments on basically their concerns, their frustration with hazing. I totally respect it. This is a space really to tell and speak on the victims' lives that were untold. No one has actually talked about this particular story on YouTube until now. And so my job with this story is to uncover some truths that we have to reconcile with internally. The mindset or the aspiration to join a fraternity, how serious it can get, both deadly and harming and alarming for the parents and for the victims who have honestly been reported, and a lot of victims, many, if not even the hundreds, that continue on their lives, never mentioning, by the way, that they experienced some level of hazing while they were in college, whether at HBCU or a PWI. For that reason, it gives me a lot of concern, and it gives me every more of my mission, unfortunately, due to the tragic results surrounding the hazing incident with Caleb Wilson in Louisiana and many others. But this story that I'm going to share with you will show you how, at much great lengths, our passion to join a fraternity looks like, and how the effects after the fact, both from the university and the organization, what it looks like after the fact. So don't go anywhere, because we're going to get into it. The facts also I want to share with you towards the end. You'll want to stick around. So stay tuned, get comfortable, because we about to get it unplugged. Let's get it unplugged, y'all. Okay, if you're still with us, that means you don't mind the details that you're going to hear. And so this story right here is going to be a little bit tough to listen to. There's some things that maybe even I might even be emotionally charged about, but do know we're going to give this brother his due respect, his honor, and his legacy to help spread the word about hazing, both at essentially where it can all happen, PWIs, HBCUs. Caleb Wilson is an isolated case, and there are stories before him that never have been talked about, at least not publicly. And I think now we're living in a day and age where these stories right here are similar to it, are starting to get traction because people are sick and tired of lives being lost. And so am I, frankly. So let's get into it. I'm going to start off with a quote. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And that's written by Frederick Douglass. So I have to say, welcome back to Cultured Unplugged. Today, we're uncovering a dark and heartbreaking story that exposes the deadly side of Greek life on college campuses. In 2009, a young man named Donnie Wade Jr. died after a brutal hazing ritual while pledging Phi Beta Sigma at Prairie View A&M University. That's down in Texas, by the way. So this just really isn't about one tragedy, this story. It's about the toxic culture also of silence, abuse, and the alarming frequency of hazing deaths that continue to haunt college campuses everywhere. If you thought about hazing was just, typically harmless fun, you may have heard friends or family that may have gone through some type of process or intake of hazing where they may have said very minimal, if not anything at all, related to their experience, often really being in fear of being ostracized on college campuses or outside of them. So it comes from such amount of really painful stories that people also choose not to share. But this story, you want to stay tuned because this story really needs to be heard. First, let's talk about Donnie Wade Jr. At just 20 years old, Donnie was a bright and ambitious student with dreams of becoming an engineer. He was well-liked, intelligent, and had his whole life ahead of him. When he decided to pledge Phi Beta Sigma, he saw it really as a chance to connect with a brotherhood that would support him through college and beyond. But instead of brotherhood, Donnie found himself caught in a nightmare, one that would end with his life cut tragically short. His death, though, would later expose a pattern of abuse and silence within the fraternity that goes on for decades. This isn't just, again, an isolated case. This has been a reoccurring case. And I have to ask, for those who are watching that maybe have been on a similar process, is this really worth it? Is brotherhood so much of an acceptance or such much of a sacred journey that you'll risk putting your life at hands? Those are questions you'll need to contend with. So on February 4th, 2009, Donnie was subjected to a brutal hazing ritual. You can call it set, you can call it intake process, whatever you want to call it. But that included relentless physical exertion, beatings, and psychological abuse, which often, by the way, is about ridicule, verbal ridicule, being in your face continuously, taunting you, telling you to get in the cut because you're going to get this paddle. I have my paddle somewhere around here. I have this paddle. This is actually going to use for a book illustration, but right now it's just a prop at this point. But just to give cool clarity, it's February 4th, 2009. It is extremely cold outside. So after a couple of beatings and being paddled, you're with maybe 8 or so other members who are trying, or other prospective members who are trying, or pledges that are trying to join. And then they are also getting the brunt of the weather, probably thinking psychologically, can I keep on going? See, there's a psychological component to this that's important to address. So this is where it really gets worse. According to multiple witnesses, Donnie and other pledges were forced to perform extreme exercises for hours. Push-ups, wall sits, sprints, often while being physically assaulted with paddles. Can you imagine that? You're trying to follow the instruction of about 8 to 10 or 15 to 20 grown, older men usually, that are having you do all of these extreme exercises beyond what your body can handle. I told you before, your body is fragile. It can not only handle but so much. But while you're doing those wall sits, while you're doing those sit-ups, crunches, sweating profusely on the carpet or the ground floor because they're not putting you anything nice, having you share water out of the same bowl, you are also then being assaulted with paddles. Is that the kind of brotherhood that you want? I'm gonna leave you to that. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. When Donnie began to show signs of distress, vomiting, struggling to stand, visibly exhausted, his so-called brothers reportedly ignored him. Instead of stopping, they allegedly intensified the abuse. So at some point, Donnie collapsed. This is 15 years ago, people. Donnie collapsed. Instead of immediately, this is going to sound very familiar to what's going on right now in the news. Instead of immediately calling 911, members reportedly hesitated. They are fearing the legal and the social consequences of their actions. But see, this is the problem. So it's telling me that, wait a minute, I'm not in fear of losing, the legal ramifications while I'm doing the act, but it's the result of the said act that led to my brother or the prospective brother now in medical distress that I'm not going to do anything about it. Like I'm more in fear about it. So I'm going to wait, try to come up with a plan. creating a cover-up, perhaps. By the time help was finally called, so time had passed, it was too late. Donnie was pronounced dead. Dead. Shortly after arriving at the hospital, the autopsy revealed he died from, and this is really hard for me to pronounce, and so I'm going to really struggle with this, and some of you already know what this condition is, from rhabdomyolysis, a condition where muscle tissue breaks down and releases. It's where the muscle tissue, I'm going to read it again. Basically, it's the condition where the muscle tissue breaks down and releases toxins into the bloodstream, leading to kidney failure. Something similar to that would be sepsis, by the way. This condition is a known risk, especially during extreme physical stress, especially in a hazing context. Can I show you that picture one more time? I want to show you this picture. So viewer discretion advised. I told you some of the contents of what I'm going to speak about may be very hard to watch. But look at that. Look at that image. I'm not sure if I pointed the right way where I'm showing the image, but look at the image. That's only an example of my actual injury that resonates with this case, where things have gone way too far and arrogance leads to problematic situations where things can get very deadly. And unfortunately for Donnie, and fortunately for me, my survival, but his death 15 years ago. So after Donnie's death, check this out. After Donnie's death, Phi Beta Sigma quickly moved to suspend the chapter at Prairie View A&M. Well, of course. They want to separate themselves from that particular chapter. Now, we do know hazing can happen in any school and at any chapter. And certain chapters carry a certain stigma, carry a certain sigma, if you will. It also carry various levels and severity of hazing. So, but the response really, though, this is really the kicker. The response from the university and the fraternity's national organization was heavily criticized as being too little, too late. Donnie's parents ended up filing a lawsuit to both the fraternity and the university. This was a planned cover-up, by the way, and rightfully so. The parents did the due diligence. They alleged that gross negligence and a cover-up of previous hazing incidents. Shockingly, it came to light that this really wasn't the first time Phi Beta Sigma had been accused of violent hazing practices. In fact, over the past 2 decades, the fraternity had been implicated in several other cases that were either settled quietly or dismissed without major consequences. We talk about how legal ramifications of cases similar to this really directly correlating with fraternities and sororities, especially related to the Divine Nine, how things just kind of get quietly into the wind and nobody talks about it. But we're going to be talking about it. So why aren't there harsher penalties? Some say it's because Greek life generates too much money and influences on campuses across America. Well, we see that. Look at any given homecoming. If you ever seen the TV show BET College Hill, you'll remember how many of those guests openly showed you exactly how people enjoy the culture of Greek life and how they feel about it today and still feel about it today. Regarding Caleb Wilson, people are still going to want to go through a process. There are processes that were going on, and as this case unfolded, guess what? Pull out their phone, looked at each other after another crazy hell night for themselves, and still committed that, damn, I'm sorry that had to be him. He could have been another brother that crossed. Yet, we don't care because we got our own mission, our own proud moment, because our daddy did it, because my grandmother did it, because my sister did it. I'm going to be a whatever theta, sigma, kappa, whatever it is. I'm going to be that, regardless of the risks involved and how I may be treated, if something doesn't happen in my favor, like my life lost. Think about that. So, why aren't there harsher penalties? We have to understand that, again, the influence of this reaches in places of parts of government, local government, your attorneys, your mailmen, people that you work with, you go see when you pick up groceries. There's an influence and a power dynamic there. And really, the scary part about it, also the aspect of control. The culture of silence and self-policing within fraternities often means these incidents really get buried until someone dies. That's when all that hell, hits the fan, the shit hits the fan, as they say. Another instance of that. So Donnie's tragic story is just one example of a larger problem. According to a report from hazingprevention.org, there have been over 77 hazing-related deaths since 2000. And those are just the ones that we know about. Think about the ones that people are afraid to talk about. Think about the many of people that you may know who have attended when you were at a HBCU back in the day, or if you're going to college now, or just in general, the hearsay. Did you know such and such went and tried to be? No, you hardly hear about those cases. Why? Because people have a fear who have attempted, young people, especially older folks that graduated 99, 92, 95, 2005, 2009, have a fear of being ostracized. Yeah, you didn't know that organizations even look at those who didn't cross those burning sands as being nothing more than someone who just didn't make it, and we can't respect them. We may never cross paths, or we may share a fake smile or a face of disgust. These are the things that people don't want to talk about, or do. Maybe they talk about it behind closed doors, but this is really concerning. So in many cases, universities and sororities, fraternities work behind the scenes to settle these incidents quickly to protect their reputation. Do these organizations and higher educational institutions have a greater purpose to protect themselves over a life at a school? Deeply troubling. The real issue here is the normalization of violence as a rite of passage. When we allow young men and women to be tortured under the guise of tradition and brotherhood. We talked about how the influence comes from several places. If you grew up with your mom or your dad being a part of an organization, you may be influenced by them. Maybe you were a kid once and you saw someone that you love, grow up with them, your parent, dad, they get on and they join XYZ fraternity and sorority. Remember the movie Burning Sands? We'll talk about that in another video, by the way. But in Burning Sands, the main character, Z, his father was trying to call him. The advisor in that fictional fraternity mentioned that your daddy was trying to be a lambda, right? And he said, yeah. Well, you're going to cross those burning sands. Your daddy didn't make it, but you're going to do it. Okay. So this is where the culture really gets scary. We're sending really a clear message that loyalty to an organization is more valuable than a human life. And it's really not just about the physical abuse. It's the psychological abuse. The humiliation and the threats are just really as damaging. We're creating a culture of fear and silence for the victims and the witnesses from coming forward. So these witnesses, let's just say, for instance, let's kind of jump into the current case with Caleb Wilson, who was trying him and his other line, it was like eight others who were online. How do you think they feel about this situation? Witnessing their own line brother killed on the line, and their reaction given by the Caleb McRae and other members who were there that night, witnessing a seizure from a collapse from a black boxing glove. Did you know that, by the way? A black boxing glove was the key evidence that the police in Baton Rouge were able to recover. Boxing gloves. To come out and to know that as a parent, you gotta think about it. His parents, and rest in peace to the victim, Caleb Wilson, and much respect and love to the parents. But his parents must be extremely distraught about that. The boy was only about 120, 130 in weight. If you look at his pictures, he's not that big. He's short. He was the tail end, the first person in line. The first person in line, by the way, if you didn't know, they get treated the worst because they don't have anyone else to protect them but the brothers that are in the back of them. The tail end also gets it just as bad. So you can imagine the tail end getting their back busted wide open, and the chest of the ace, or the first person in line, gets the front abuse. There's a thing when you're going through what they call lockup, or you're going through a line, and these brothers pretty much get tight and get connected, and they get intensity, and they grits, showing their grit, showing intensity, everything intensity. Piss poor practice, performance pay. You had it for self-destruction. Self-destruction. You had it for self-destruction. I don't mean to be animated. It's no joking matter when I say this, because this young man could have been saved. And the details of Caleb Wilson's life being on the line, having a similar story, just like Donnie Wade Jr. here, is troubling. Because they waited. Omega Psi Phi, members of Omega Psi Phi at this particular chapter at Baton Rouge from Southern University, students, alumni as well included, speaking about Caleb McCrae, had a duty that when they saw signs of emotional medical distress, that they acted quickly. Instead, letting his lifeless body slip away on that warehouse floor, the actions taken was to devise a plan to make a cover-up, fearing the legal consequences, fearing what could happen emotionally, publicly, from their friends, peers, people who now view them differently. This is a different time. It's 2025. This is serious. And from what I am really reading here with that story and case, it is completely damning to lie and say he collapsed after playing basketball. He was dropped off at the hospital and died at 3:15 in the morning. If you've never seen that movie Burning Sands, and reading these stories that I've been reading to you, you'll often really see the theme of how this is a reoccurring and similar case. I'm not done. So what can we do to stop this? For starters, there really needs to be real accountability, not just for the individuals directly involved, but for the organizations that allow hazing to flourish. Universities need to stop protecting fraternities for the sake of donations and prestige. And as students, parents, and alumni, we need to demand more transparency and tougher anti-hazing laws. Now, you may be wondering, if you're in an organization, you're watching this video, and you're saying, how could he talk about this? How could he put us out there? Well, I have to say to you, at the end of the day, my life, my whole purpose is to take my experience and my very real experience to protect others, to make sure that parents can expect to see their kids during spring break, during Christmas break, to make sure that their kids can be safe. I want to protect young people and have them, give them a greater awareness. I am what you may call the disclaimer on a cigarette box. That's who I am. So before those cigarettes and drugs get out into the streets, people have a warning label attached to them. HBCUs need to have a greater warning label. And every class is usually an orientation before you even join, fully acquainted into a new university or college or community college. There's an orientation class. Why aren't the orientation classes talking about the dangers of hazing? Could it possibly spare lives in the future? That's something to think about. I sure as hope now that other schools and other Greek letter organizations across the nation are making every effort to institute some type of auditing that ensures that the life, the health, and if that's so important, the reputation is protected by prevention, through acts of prevention. So just to be a little bit more transparent here, what I'm talking about, hazing isn't a tradition, it's a crime. And as long as we keep treating it like a rite of passage, more lives will be lost. I have to really quote a civil rights leader when I say, never forget where we've been and what it took to get where we are. Donnie Wade Jr.'s story is a classic reminder that the fight for justice and accountability is far from over. If you found this story really to be so powerful, you should like it, you should share it, you should think about it, you should have conversations in your home, with your family, people that you know who have gone through a similar hazing story where they probably could have almost lost their lives. Now, I'll say this, use caution, use discretion. Not everybody or not everyone is comfortable to come up and speak out. It's a mental state of being ready. But if there's a Me Too movement on domestic violence, then I damn sure know there should be a Me Too movement on fraternity and sorority hazing, and wherever really hazing exists. And from bands to dance teams, shit, if it's on an HBCU campus, the damn chess team. If there's any type of physical or verbal abuse where someone can lose their life, their emotional stability, mental stability, and wellness, it should be eradicated to the full extent of policy and the law. This isn't an isolated case. We've got a greater responsibility to protect young people from the aspects of hazing. There are many other stories, by the way. And I know many of you in the comments have asked and talked about, well, why haven't I talked about white fraternities and sororities and the things that they have done? Don't worry, we'll get to it. I've talked about Max Groover and how his case at Louisiana State University, the same state of the Caleb Wilson case, and how his life was cut short due to alcoholism, alcohol poisoning. Most of those stories, I will say, with white fraternities, sororities, does it not make it okay in how they died. They're still victims and they still have died, but have died at the hands of overconsumption of alcohol. It is the power dynamic and the idea of control. If you ever remember seeing the movie, I remember talking to you earlier about Burning Sands, the character in there, his name was Ernest, but they called him Square. Square, or Ernest, had a troubling reason. He wanted to be in the Lambda organization, the fictional fraternity, by the way, in that movie, because no one really knew his name. Nobody really saw him. He was a shadow amongst his peers, in between classes, going to the caf, going back to the dorm hall where people were playing nights of playing spades, laughing, joking, drinking, going to parties together, trying to find his space of acceptance in a school community that's so large and so great that he just wants to be noticed. He wants the aspect of acceptance. And this was the opportunity to, because he loved looking at women. He wanted to have the ire of and desire of what these letters look like on you as a person who's joined a fraternity or sorority. He wanted the same love, the same respect, to be a part of a network that now has access in their minds. It was about, for him, People knew that he was more than a square, that he was earnest. The fly guy that's getting now all the girls because he's crossed. If you ever met someone who's been a square and now actually joined a fraternity or sorority, look and see how their lives now, that Greek life is their whole identity. The organization to which they crossed those burning sands is now, that's who they are. The old person who used to be, according to them, is gone. And that's troubling, because friends that knew him and loved him best, the family that knew and loved him best, waiting for them at home, who really know the real Ernest, miss out because Ernest doesn't want to hang with them no more. Ernest is focused now on this new organization that's now giving him all this new love that he's never had before. Something to think about. Again, if you found that this story is powerful, make sure to like, share it, subscribe to Cultured Unplugged, and let's keep demanding justice for Donnie and other hazing victims. Until the next time, I hope that you be blessed. Also, before I go, leave your comments in the comment section. I want to know what you feel that you felt when it comes to this story. If you know of any other stories that you'd like me to highlight, or if you're someone who would like to get some representation and allow me to either anonymously or very publicly share your story, I want you to do so at the email right here at coveredandcultured.com. I want to hear from you. I want to share your story. I want to empower you. I want to take the control back that you allowed that organization to take away from you. That power, I want you to own it. I want you to own your story, your testimony. Because Donnie Wade Jr., unfortunately, he can't tell that story. I'm helping him be his voice from across the grave, unfortunately. And to his family that may have seen this video, I mean no harm. I mean all the love. I am deeply, deeply sorry that it had to be you. But maybe I can take his story, his legacy, and make it a beautiful thing and save someone else. Let's get it unplugged.